My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Superman, The Last Days of Lex Luthor is the host of the Krypton Report podcast, returning guest, Tyler Patrick. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's great to be here and talking about today's subject. After you and I had kind of talked about it about a year or so ago, and it's nice to finally get to finish up.
Yeah, as it turns out, it's called The Last Days of Lex Luthor, but it could have also been called The Last Days of Superman. You know what I mean? Who knew?
Yeah. This story went a completely different way than I had thought. So
I have some strong thoughts and feelings. This will be cathartic as it always is. My friend, would you like to do the honors and give our audience their spoiler warning?
This is a spoiler warning for the 3 books by Mark Waid that have come out, The Last Days of Lex Luthor by Mark Waid and Bryan Hitch. It is now all on the app. That was one of the things that we waited for before discussing this. I say go read it, then come back and join us for this.
Yeah, right on. So as of this recording, to your point, all 3 issues of this Black Label miniseries by Mark Waid and Bryan Hitch have been published and are on the app, at least at the Ultra tier. And again, as of this recording, we are awaiting the late June publication of the hardcover collecting the entire miniseries. But like you said, there will be spoilers. So for anyone who hasn't yet read the miniseries and also doesn't want spoilers, this might be an episode to save until you've been able to experience the story for yourself. But for everyone else, join us and we're going to have a great time. Now, you mentioned a Patreon episode that you and I had done. And yes, that's true. That was quite a while ago. We did an episode on my Patreon channel. It was a free bonus episode on issue 1, which was all that we had to work with for quite some time. Now, there's so much to talk about with respect to the story itself. I don't really feel like we need to dwell on the publication side of things. But yes, it is the case that issue 1 of this 3-issue miniseries came out in July 2023, and it was meant to follow a bi-monthly release schedule. Well, as it turned out, issues 2 and 3 didn't come out until March and April of 2025. So this took quite some time for these 3 issues. I know along the way, both Mark Waid and Bryan Hitch talked about this in various forums. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Mark Waid talked about this on your podcast as well, right?
Yes. And I was actually messaging you when that time I was talking to him. And I mean, that was right as he was coming back. He hadn't started doing World's Finest, I believe, at the time. There was this. And what's crazy is when I bought the first issue, I was still going to my local comic shop that's right here near where I live, like 10 minutes. And it's been closed for a while. So it's like, I'm sitting there thinking, like, man, I knew it was a year, but it was almost 2 years ago that the first book came out.
Yeah, for sure. And so both of the creators talked about essentially this idea that DC really wanted to get the book out there, even though it seems like it was clear to all involved that that original schedule was not going to be feasible. So they talked about that, and then along the way, they gave updates on the progress of the book and what the relaunch plan was. They ended up reprinting issue 1 and then getting 2 and 3 out right after. This does point to one of our patron questions that we got. This is from our pal Josh Marowitz. So we'll address this question, and then this will probably be all we need to say about the publication side of it. Josh asks, did the wait between issues 1 and 2 affect your enjoyment of the story, for better or worse? Did it for you in any way?
I mean, it kind of killed the momentum and the excitement that I had at the time, having to wait so long for the next parts. But then I told you before, is when 2 dropped, I bought it because I'd already bought the first one. So I wanted all 3. And then I bought the third one at my comic book shop. I think for Free Comic Book Day is when I picked it up. And then I sat down and read all 3. So then it was a different experience because now I'm reading it without that mindset of, ooh, what's the next issue going to bring? I just kept going.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I'll say for myself, with respect to the last days of Lex Luthor, to answer Josh's question, it didn't really bother me. It didn't make a difference one way or the other, to be perfectly honest. I mean, this will sound a little silly to people, but honestly, the most it quote unquote affected me was in terms of podcast planning.
Yeah. I had on my, because I break down mine, and I know you do too. I had as floating episode last days of Lex Luthor because we didn't have an idea, and I just wanted to keep it in my consciousness that whenever it did come through, like I could do it.
Yeah, 100%. So that was the most that it affected me. Otherwise, I read the first issue for when we did that Patreon episode, and I knew that we would get to the rest of it and we would talk about it. So no, it didn't. And I obviously, when I sat down to prepare for this recording, I read all 3 issues together, and it was a very seamless reading experience. I did not read 2 and 3 as they were coming out. I just figured, fool me once. I was like, let me just wait until they're all out.
Because who knows? They could be like, 3's coming out next month. And then it's like, there's an issue. And then it comes out in 6 months.
Yes. So when this episode comes out, the miniseries will still be very fresh. But for people who maybe this is the only way that they're experiencing the story, or people who might come to this episode years later, let me kind of give a rundown of the basic plot points, and then we'll go through it and we'll share our take. And I'm really curious to compare notes, because you and I really have not done that ahead of time, other than saying, boy, we have a lot to talk about. So I'm curious to see where you landed on all of this. But the basic premise of this book is that Lex Luthor is dying of this mysterious disease he contracted while experimenting with kryptonite. And he petitions Superman to save his life. And Superman agrees against the public outcry to simply let this ultimate villain die. So he makes it his personal quest to save Lex from this mysterious terminal disease. And over the course of the first 2 issues, basically takes Lex on a tour through the DC universe, searching for a cure. So we go to Kandor, the Phantom Zone, the 31st Century, Themyscira, Atlantis. We have this massive double-page spread that shows us some of their other stops along the way, including Oa, Ran, Thanagar, encounters with the Spectre, Mxyzptlk, the New Gods, and so on. But ultimately, these all prove fruitless. And we get to the point at the end of issue 2 where Lex is really pressing Superman. Like, why does this mean so much to you? It seems personal. And it's at this point that Superman reveals to Lex that he is actually Clark Kent. And there's this notion that Clark blames himself for the way Lex turned out, because Clark did not confide his secret in Lex when they were friends back in Smallville. And at the end of issue 2, Brainiac emerges as the ultimate villain of the piece, and this twist that Brainiac is actually responsible for this disease that Lex is suffering from. And it's not only killing Lex, but it's depleting Superman's powers as well. And then in our final issue, Brainiac has subjugated the Earth. He's incapacitated the rest of the world's heroes. And Lex comes up with this device that will restore Superman's powers, but the cost is Lex's life. And he's willing to make this sacrifice at this point in the story so that Superman can defeat Brainiac. But because Superman must protect all life at all costs. He cannot abide this. And so instead of going along with Lex's plan here, he rewires the device such that it effectively transfers his powers to Lex. So Lex is saved and given the powers of Superman, while Superman loses his powers and has to rely on the last ebbs of energy that he has left. All in the hope that Lex will prove Superman right, that he's actually capable of good and has been all along and will make the right choice and save the Earth from Brainiac. And he does, and they work together to achieve that. And then in the end, Brainiac's body self-destructs and causes this massive explosion under a red sun, posing danger to our co-leads here. And Lex, as far as the world knows, dies in the blast, and that's the end of it. We find out in the very final moments that with Lex's dying act, he saved Clark from this blast and said, "Tell no one." And as the story ends, we have Clark, a powerless Clark. He's no longer Superman. He's retired. He's passed his duties on to the rest of the Justice League to carry on in his place. And he's back on the farm, and he pulls out the telescope that Lex and Clark used to stargaze with. And he looks up in the sky, remembering his friend. So that's the last days of Lex Luthor and Superman, right, as it turned out. So big picture, how did this land for you? What are your thoughts and feelings?
When I first read it, so I was reading it in bed next to Jania, and I was excited. And I just kind of got to the end. I was like, huh, okay. I had to meditate on it a while. But I think the biggest part of this, for this to really work for me, I have to kind of look at it in, we talked about this a little bit, like how it feels like this is a continuation of the Birthright, Lex and Clark. Like this is them farther in their journey. And for me to really get this story and to hit the emotional beats, I have to kind of link the stories. Because if I'm just starting in issue 1 of this, it being kind of an Elseworlds, Black Label, non-continuity, I don't really know this Lex and Clark. I don't know their history. I don't know the dynamic. So for it to try to pull me into this, a big emotional thing at the end, I need more history. So if I go in and I retroactively add Birthright into this, it starts to build that. Now, I had recently read Birthright because my wife was reading it, and then some things happened and she put it down and hasn't picked it up in 3 months. So that was relatively fresh in my mind, just having that, because it goes back to them as the telescope, them as the kids, like, I think I needed that to land right. And I have more to say, but I don't want to say everything. So I want you to talk too, but I needed to feel the depth of their friendship, of his feelings towards Lex, of what he wishes he had been, more than just trying to okay, fill in the gaps for yourself with your previous knowledge. Because if I look over at what's going on with Lex and Superman and Joshua Williams' run, that's a different dynamic, and then if I look in books like where I was reading the New 52 we did for the podcast last year, that's a different dynamic. So I need to know who this Superman and who this Lex is to really appreciate this story.
Okay, yes. So you have hit on one of the big picture questions here about whether and to what extent The Last Days of Lex Luthor functions as a sequel to Superman Birthright, which I have gone on record as saying is my favorite version of the Superman origin story, aside from Smallville, of course, which is in its own category for me. I can't remember if I said this when we did our Patreon episode on issue 1, but when I interviewed Mark Waid on this podcast about Birthright, we recorded that interview back in February 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And when we were done recording, because it was all about Superman Birthright, and I had asked him, is there any chance of a sequel? And he had to kind of dance around it in the interview. And then when we were done and I wasn't recording, he was like, you can't tell anyone, but yeah, there's going to be a sequel to Superman Birthright. And I was like, yeah, I was so excited. Now, obviously, by the time it went to publication, right, it was not called Birthright in any way, shape, or form. And it was published under this Black Label imprint. And to your point, there is connective tissue to Birthright, specifically in the depiction of that Smallville friendship between Clark and Lex. And I actually went back to Birthright If I'm not mistaken, I think it was issue number 8. That's the key flashback issue where you see Clark and Lex's past in Smallville. And it lines up almost exactly with what we see here in the last days of Lex Luthor in terms of what Lex was like in Smallville, what that quasi friendship was like between Clark and Lex, and how that incident played out that led to Lex going bald and leaving Smallville. So in that sense, yes, it very much follows what was established there. Otherwise, I guess that's a bit of a question. And in fact, that's a question we got from one of our patrons, Jan, who submitted a number of questions, but one of them that points exactly to what we're talking about is this story a successful sequel to Birthright? And I guess my addendum to that question is it fair to look at it as a sequel? Should we look at it more as a spiritual companion? Is that a better way to think of it? Where do you land on this?
It feels like to me, if we're looking, let's talk like, like if Birthright was a trilogy, okay, Birthright is our first movie. Last Days of Lex Luthor is our third film. We didn't get the second film. It'd be like watching Star Wars than watching Return of the Jedi. You see connective tissue, but you still feel like something's missing. Because I feel like Birthright was the start of their story. This is the end of the story. We didn't get the story.
Yes.
That's how I feel about it, because I see all the connective tissue and I feel like it, and it's almost like a legacy sequel, where you did a story and then you do another one like 20 years later, where like, okay, now we're going to catch up with our characters 20 years down the road and tell their end story. So I feel like it succeeds, but it's not a direct sequel, as in picking up where we left off. We're picking up way down the line and watching the end of the story.
I agree 100%. I mean, I guess my feelings on this are, I don't know, in a way, I think spiritual companion is the better way to think of it. I think as far as the Clark-Lex friendship relationship dynamic goes, yes, it is a sequel. And really, like I said, it follows very closely. It adheres to what was established in Birthright and gives you the other side of it. It takes you all the way to the end of that friendship. But as I was really reflecting on this, and Jan's question in particular, with Birthright, that 12-issue, year-long saga, its scope was much larger, right? Mm-hmm. It's about Clark becoming Superman, but you get Krypton, you get the farm, you get Metropolis, you get Lex, we get Lois and Perry and Jimmy. And yes, they're here in Last Days of Lex Luthor, but their appearances are relatively minimal. And so I guess in that sense, to me, one of the biggest differentiations between the two stories is how much more limited the scope of the Last Days of Lex Luthor is. It is, and I'm not saying this as a plus or a minus necessarily, it's just a distinction because it is hyper focused on that relationship between Clark and Lex. And like I said, not a critique. I mean, if I had my way, right? If it were a true sequel to Birthright, I would want to see those dynamics that were set up between Clark and all of these other characters at the Daily Planet. I would want to see that play out more fully. I would want to see a present day return to the farm and see adult Clark's interactions with his parents. There's a lot more that I would want to see play out. I mean, in Birthright, there's reference to the fact that no one's seen Lana Lang in years. But what happened to Lana Lang? I would love to know that. There's references, I think, in Birthright, and then in the back matter of the collected edition, Waid talks about how, there's this idea of Martha and Clark having gotten into all these adventures, trying to track down UFO sightings and things like that, and breaking into Area 51, stuff like that. So if it, to me, if this were a true sequel to Birthright, I feel like we would have seen more play with respect to what we had already gotten in the first story. And we don't get that here. We get a very hyper-focused, a much narrower scope of a story focusing on Lex and Clark. So it's like, in my mind, it's a sequel in that respect, but I'm hard-pressed to say, like, yes, this is a true successful sequel to the entirety of Birthright.
Well, let's look at this. Birthright was 12 issues, and I just counted the pages of the first book. It's roughly 2 books, like 2 comics. So you could look at this is like a 6-issue series. So that's half the story, And if you're looking at comparing it, so, and maybe if they weren't doing it in this Black Label, prestige format and had just done this as a 12 issue miniseries or a 6, we would have gotten that type of scope and started bigger and funneling it down. It's like The Wolverine. It's the second Wolverine movie, but it's a sequel to the X-Men movies. But the story and the scope shrinks down more small. And even into Logan, like, it gets smaller. And I feel like they're like, Mark, do this sequel to Birthright. Okay, we're not going to do it like we planned because we know all the changes that DC went through. Now we're going to give you this limited maxi series, Black Label. So he looks at, like, okay, what's the story I can now tell in this? Because maybe he had a larger story. Maybe it was more of that direct everything sequel, but then it's like, okay, they're not going to do it like that. They're doing these Black Label books. So he had to, dial it in. I was like, just for me to really feel that Lex Luthor Clark history, I look at it as connecting to Birthright, because then I feel like it gives me more of that full story history, that these characters have gone on a journey that's more, I see the beginning and I see the end.
Yeah. So I guess a couple of things. One, on the note of interviewing Mark Waid, as always, these interviews are subject to change. But if all goes as according to plan, next week you guys will hear a fresh interview with Mark Waid here on Digging for Kryptonite, and we'll talk about his Superboy stories, his new Superboy stories in Action Comics, and of course we'll talk about this. So that might be one of the things that I will pose to him. I guess I agree with you, kind of imagining what maybe some of the behind the scenes discussions were like. I think when you look at where we landed, this Black Label Last Days of Lex Luthor miniseries, and specifically the flashbacks that they give us of Clark and Lex, which really mirror what we got in Birthright. It's the sort of thing where if you know and love Birthright, you can look at this as a continuation and a conclusion. But if you never read Birthright, and look, it looms really large for me and for you, and maybe for a good number of our listeners as well. But at the same time, I do have to take a step back. It's like Birthright was over 20 years ago, right? And yes, it's been collected and it's remained in print and all of that, but I don't know how large it looms for the general audience. And so kind of the idea of saying, hey, we're not going to call this Birthright 2, The Last Days of Lex Luthor. This is going to be its own thing, but you can look at it in that way. So if that's why we landed where we did with this sort of kind of spiritual sequel as opposed to a direct sequel, like, I get that. I can understand that. Like I said, is it what I would have wanted in my heart of hearts? But I get it.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I'll land there too. It's like we could argue it back and forth all day, but it's like what you bring into it, what you really want out of the story. And it is an interesting story.
Yeah. And I want to get your take on all of these things. I guess my last big thing when we're talking about this question about the extent to which it functions as a sequel. All right, I'm a little torn on this. And by the way, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a tough position here, right? Because I'm anticipating having Waid on the show, right? And I want to be respectful, but at the same time, I want to be honest about how I felt about this story. And let me just say, because I guess I haven't really given my personal opinion, my feelings fully yet. Overall, I really did enjoy The Last Days of Lex Luthor, and there's a lot about it that I really enjoyed. There was a point in the story, though, where I hit a huge wall, and I don't know that I'm going to quite be able to overcome it. Maybe I will by the end of this conversation. I don't know. But I guess when I was looking at Last Days of Lex Luthor, and specifically the flashback scenes, right, because we see moments of Clark and Lex in Smallville, where they're more or less contemporaries. I think if we kind of go back to Birthright, Lex was slightly older, but because of kind of his attitude when he was taking the placement exams, he ended up in the same grade as Clark, something to that effect, I think.
Yeah.
But we get a few of these moments here. So there's a moment where Lex is getting bullied by some of the kids from school on the street, and Clark intervenes. He uses his powers undetected by the others, and they have a conversation. And right off the bat, like, you see the kind of the kinship, the common ground between the two of them. Lex questions, like, why is Clark out on the street this late? Shouldn't he be at home milking a cow? And there's this running bit where he calls him Old MacDonald, and Clark goes E-I-E-I-O, right?
Yeah.
And Clark explains, well, I got detention because I was arguing with the teacher about my answer to this question. And he shows Lex, and Lex looks at it and he's like, you're right. The question was wrong. The question was flawed. Didn't anyone else notice this? Right? So you see right from the jump that there's this kind of common ground between them. And then this is through Superman's narration. We get a little bit more insight into what Lex is like at this point in time in his life. And there's a scene where he takes it upon himself to fix a leak in a neighbor's tractor, right? Or to convert it to a solar power tractor, but he doesn't tell the neighbor what he's doing or why he's doing it. And he gets chased off. And this tracks completely with what we saw in Birthright, like this overall notion that the town views Lex with fear / disdain / a lack of understanding, right? His intellect and his abrasiveness is something that the town can't quite reconcile, right? And so there's a look that he gets from them time after time. And then there's another scene where Clark and Lex are stargazing, and Clark brings up this incident about the tractor, and he's like, hey, maybe if you just apologize, and that sets Lex off, right? And you get the sense that this is how most of their interactions go usually, right? Like they're okay till a point, and then Lex like flips out and storms off. And then this builds in the flashbacks to what I refer to as the incident, right? Where Lex is conducting this experiment. He's built this device powered by kryptonite, by this meteor rock that he's found, that's going to allow him to open a wormhole, a portal through time and space, and see an alien planet. Because his whole thing is like, he can't believe that there isn't other intelligent life in the universe, and he's going to prove it. And in both Birthright and The Last Days of Lex Luthor, when he shows Clark this experiment, he shows him the meteor rock. This is the first time Clark has encountered kryptonite. And he recoils in pain. He's never experienced this. And Lex mistakes Clark's pain for disgust, for that same look of disdain and lack of understanding that he's seen from everyone else. And he kicks Clark out and locks him out. And the experiment goes awry and everything goes up in flames and his head's on fire and he's losing all of his hair and everything. And then the next day, Lex is gone. I guess, and I don't want to nitpick, and I recognize like this is not my story. I'm not the writer of Last Days of Lex Luthor. It would have been cool to see something new or different with respect to their past that we didn't already see in Birthright. And I get this is serving an audience. Yes, an audience that includes people who already read Birthright, but also an audience that never read Birthright. I get that. I appreciate that. But I don't know. I guess in terms of the flashbacks, I don't feel like we learned really anything new that we didn't already get in Birthright. And it would have been cool if there was just, give me something. Give me like one freaking thing and I'd be happy. I don't know if you bumped up against that at all.
What's the book called? I'm trying to remember. I have it, but I can't remember the exact name. It's a Two-Face book where the events of that story are like the panels you don't see in The Long Halloween. So it's like the character, like Harvey Dent exits like in this panel, and then in The Long Halloween, and you're left with like Batman and Jim. But then it's like, this is what happened during that time. So it's almost like a book you insert into another story. And I feel like this could have had certain parts where, okay, this is the panel you saw in Birthright, but here's the other part of this that happened like right after this event. This is what Lex did, or this is what Clark did. Or this is a conversation that was had between Lana and Clark about Lex, or Lex and his father that we hadn't seen, or, after Lex left, instead of, like you said, repeating certain beats. And, it seems like Mark Waid has a really love for Superboy. As you said, like he's getting ready to do new Superboy in the traditional sense. And this is kind of restoring that idea of the Clark Lex friendship in Smallville when they were kids, like it wasn't Superboy without Clark being Superboy here. So he really wants to drive that home. And I don't know if in the story here, having the ability that's a black label gives you that more freedom to do whatever and not have to worry about, I don't know if the characters would actually do this, but in my story they are.
Yeah, dude, like I'm shocked that he didn't have Clark be Superboy in this. Because when I talked to him about Birthright, he said if it had been up to him and if he didn't need to fit within the existing continuity when he was writing Birthright, he would have had Clark be Superboy. So I would have figured given the freedom of the Black Label imprint, right, and the fact that this isn't technically called Birthright 2, I would have assumed he would have had Clark be Superboy. So yeah, that actually was surprising to me. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing that I I guess I wrestle with a little bit, and I fully acknowledge and own my bias here. Okay, to be clear, but and the audience knows how much I love Smallville and how much I love the television series and how much I love that broken friendship that we got to track over multiple seasons between Clark and Lex. And we've talked about it at length, so people can go back to those episodes, but it's like Lex starts off, he's the nicest guy in town, and there's a true friendship between them. And you go back to those early seasons, and Lex is arranging for fireworks at a party that Clark is throwing so that he'll look good in front of his friends. Lex arranges for Lana and Clark to show up at the same event so they can have some time together, right? He's tying Clark's bow tie in the barn, telling him our friendship is the stuff of legend, like all this stuff where you feel this genuine friendship, and then it's all the more tragic when it breaks down. I guess in terms of what Waid has presented in Birthright and the Last Days of Lex Luthor, it's a different spin on that. I mean, the baseline that, okay, as young men, they both live in Smallville and they have a friendship to an extent. Yes, that is intact, but it's very much its own thing. And once more, this is not a criticism. I get that Waid is taking his own approach. And I think from Waid's perspective, not to speak for him, but I imagine for him, he's not trying to build off of Smallville, right? Like he's building off of those Silver Age stories. And when you compare what we get in Waid's stories to what we get in the Silver Age, like there's vastly more meat on the bone here. I guess, what am I trying to say? I suppose it's sort of this notion that I don't know how invested I am in this version of the friendship with this abrasive, a young Lex Luthor. I just don't know that I care for him as much, or that I care as much for how it falls apart between them. And the fact that like Clark carries this guilt into his adulthood and really drives his quest to save Lex. I suppose had the relationship been depicted the way it was on the television show, I would get it vastly more. The way it's depicted here, I mean, they're friends, I guess. I mean, the stories, I think, do a good job of showing that common ground between them. They are both outsiders. They both feel like outsiders. And in each other, there is some kinship. There is some understanding that each one knows what the other one feels to an extent. Like, I get that. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's a little bit of a roadblock that I hit with this.
It's like they're more of comrades than like deep friends. Right? I feel like they're just building their friendship. With Smallville, we saw that grow. We saw the rise and the fall of the relationship. Here, we're just getting the little bit of flashbacks that are, they're the type of scenes that, like, to go back to use like a movie term, when you're trying to tell stuff, you're using shorthand. You know, they always say show, don't tell. But sometimes, you know, having the conversations and telling and talking really help you to understand more of where they are is in terms of their relationship to each other than just showing. And I feel like that's what we're doing here is kind of shorthand, like just showing these, oh, see this, they got along. See this, oh, they bonded that over this one thing because I need a shorthand way of telling you that these two were friends. It would have been great if we would have gotten, I don't know, like a whole issue that's just them as kids. You know, like if this was back to like a 12 issue run, like just them as kids for a whole 12 issues. I mean, a whole issue of the 12. So that we're really locking into their ups, their downs, and the things that really made them friends before it falls apart. Like if we had something where we see Lex with his like almost disdain for Clark, but then he softens to Clark and he really breaks down and softens. And we see him and Clark bonding and getting along. And he's over it for dinner with Jonathan and Martha. And he's getting along. But then when it's like that switch flips when he sees Clark and feels the disgust, like, oh, he's just like everyone else. And it's like that impacts him and it takes away and he just everything that was good he pushes away. You would feel that much more. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just spitting here.
No, I think that kind of taps into really, I think where my mileage was kind of limited in investing in this dynamic between them. Because Lex is so abrasive, and it feels like we only get a few glimpses into their dynamic, but between the two stories, it's like most of their interactions seem to end with Lex storming off. So I guess I just kind of question, it's like, well, how friendly were they really? Now, all that being said, one thing that I think the story did really nicely was, with respect to Clark's guilt, a key piece of this, and this is in Birthright as well, is that the night of the accident in Lex's lab, Clark is going there to tell Lex his secret. Right? Like, he's gotten to the point where, and I think it's sort of a two-pronged reasoning, right? Where from Clark's perspective, he's been forced to hide this, and this is an opportunity to share and not be so alone. And also, he talks in Last Days of Lex Luthor about how differently he perceives the world because of his enhanced senses. And there's a whole scientific component that even when he tries to talk to Jonathan and Martha about it, he can kind of only get so far. So, right, I think there's this idea like, oh, with Lex, I can really have a proper discussion about this. So I think there's something that Clark is looking to unburden from himself. But then also I think he sees how much Lex is struggling and feeling so alone and being so driven to prove there's other life out there. And it's like Clark can very easily prove that for him. It's like, yes, you are right. I am proof of this. And they can be this team. And so the fact that he's going there to share this when everything falls apart and all of the business with the kryptonite and the explosion, the fact that haunts him into his adult years. And there's always kind of this question of, well, if I had been able to get through to him, right? Because in Last Days of Lex Luthor, when they finally have it out and Clark and Superman appears as Clark to Lex, he says, like, what have I deprived the world of? Essentially, like, had I shared my secret with you, you wouldn't have gone down this path and you could have done all of these things for humanity. So he's been carrying this all these years. And I think the story really did do a good job in that respect. I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean,
or did you not?
No, like, you're right. And I'm rethinking, because I do this, Mark Waid's a great writer. And sometimes I sit there and rewrite things like what would work for me. And sometimes I just want more out of the emotion, the dialogue, the situation to really sell me on what's going on. Like I said, I get tired of like the shorthand stuff that I'm supposed to buy into. This book, I would have liked a little bit more, and not just moving away from like the Lex and Clark when they're young. It's like the big premise in the first book about Lex basically tricking Clark or Superman into saving him and then broadcasting it to the world, kind of like blackmailing him into saving him, I think is a unique it's a unique move, because he tricks, like, Superman, like you said, he values all life. He's going to save it. And, everybody is against, like, how could you do this? How could you save Lex, this person? And, to me, it's like, that's what he does. He saves people's lives, no matter who. And you should know that about him. I mean, it doesn't mean that Lex is not going to pay for his crimes, but is it any different than Batman not killing the Joker? Like, to flip it about this person that he just keeps locking back up that gets out. Like, Superman's going to save Lex's life because that's what he does, is save him. Now, the one thing that got me in this first book was how, if we hadn't got the Brainiac twist to it, I really wouldn't have bought it, because I'm like, there's no way that he is sick from kryptonite, that none of this can find a way to like heal him or fix him, or even outside the box thinking. I'm like, there has to be something more to it.
I agree. And I mean, to be honest, it's like, even when we get to that Brainiac reveal, it still feels like a bit of a stretch that no one else, including Brainiac 5 in the 31st century, could figure out that this was a Brainiac caused disease. But to your point, yes. I mean, I think certainly in that initial issue and even into the second, for sure, there's this central moral question about whether or not Superman should save a dying Lex Luthor. And even the way in which Lex gets Superman's attention, he commandeers this mechanical spider. Once again, we're back into a mechanical spider. Superman lives. But of course paints it purple and green and attacks these coastal islands off of Bangladesh and prompts Superman's intervention. He's able to save everyone. But yes, ultimately this was just so Lex could get Superman's attention, tell him that he's dying, that he has no other options. He can't fathom a universe in which Lex Luthor doesn't exist. And also to further twist the knife, why he's asking Superman for help, to your point, is that, yes, he's broadcasting this conversation for all the world to see, for everyone who worships Superman to see that he's willing to save the life of this despised villain. And I think that's, I like that question that the story wrestles with. And at this point in the story, there's going to come a point where I have a huge break with Superman's decisions, but not here. The fact that he's trying to save Lex tracks for me for a couple of reasons. One, as is said in the story, and as we appreciate as Superman fans, that he will save or try to save the life even of his enemies, right? That all life is sacred to him. But I think more importantly than that, for me at least, is that personal connection, right? And when you get to the end of that second issue and that reveal and all of this business about how things could have been different if I had confided in you. I mean, whether or not they would have been different, debatable. And Lex posits that himself. But from Superman's perspective, this notion that, hey, I grew up with this kid. I saw him going down a bad path. Like I thought I had a chance. We missed our moment and he's gone down this road. So the fact that that's driving him and why he would undertake this quest, that I totally buy. I know one of the things that came up, I think more in the kind of discourse about this miniseries, especially when issue 1 was announced and then when it came out, it's like, well, why would Superman try to save this disease or try to cure this disease, save this one person from this disease? What about everyone else? And to that, I would say, like, that didn't trouble me. And this is the reason why. I think this story very wisely doesn't make this cancer or leukemia or another disease that's known to the world, right? It's this mysterious kryptonite caused disease. And then of course, like I said, we find out it's Brainiac. So it's really in its own category, which I think sort of helps alleviate that criticism. And then the other thing too is, I mean, we are plunged into this story, presumably deep into Superman and Lex's careers, right? Like we have no idea. Maybe Superman took a page out of All-Star Superman number 10 and he tried to have the Kandorians, the Superman emergency squad, fly into people's bloodstreams and try to cure cancer. And maybe it worked and maybe it didn't. Like we don't know, but we can kind of fill in those gaps. And I feel like between All-Star or more specifically stories like Peace on Earth, like I feel like we have seen as fans enough instances where Superman has tried to tackle a real world problem and we kind of understand the challenges inherent in that. So that didn't bother me. Like I get why that would be a question or a problem people would have, but for me, that's kind of how I was able to overcome that. Like that didn't bother me.
I think it's because also in this story, they're trying to put that he blames and has a guilty conscience for Lex, how he turned out. Like if I had only confided in him, and I almost wish there was like some sort of part where he's like talking to Jonathan Kent and says that, and Jonathan's like, no, that doesn't make sense, son. Like the only if I like, you don't know that. You could have told him and he could have turned around and exploited you and thought of you more as a freak or more valuable of being dissected. You're beating yourself up over something that was out of your control, because I feel like part of this story, and I'm jumping to the end here, I don't think Superman should dictate people's actions. He needs to give people credit for the choices they make of the actions they choose to do. Going back to, something that you recently covered that I wrote in about was the J. Michael Straczynski scene that I love and I use at work, where the woman wants to jump and Superman gives her the speech and he says, if you decide to jump, I will not catch you. I will allow you to do this, because he's giving her the choice and he's valuing her as a person by her choice. And that's jumping to the end with what happens is with Superman, tweaking it so that Lex gets the powers and all that. He's taking away from Lex the choices. Like, he values life, yes, and he would do anything to protect life, but he's not respecting the fact that Lex is willing to sacrifice his life for the greater good as the ultimate way of redemption. And to me, I kind of feel that that's wrong.
Yes. So,
I said a lot. I know.
No. It's good. I mean, we'll unpack the ending even more in just a little bit, but no, I agree with you. That's the wall that I hit with this story. Like, the notion that Superman would try to save Lex, despite everything he's done, take him on this tour through the DC universe, come to blows with Wonder Woman because she's like, what are you doing? She decks him, right? I can buy all of that for all of the reasons that we've talked about. But when we get to the point in the story where Lex is willing to make the heroic sacrifice and give up his life to restore Superman's powers, I agree with you. I think Superman's secret rewiring of that device robs Lex of that decision and that choice in that moment. Now, he'll kind of get it back in the end when he chooses to save Clark, but in that moment of that transference, shout out to Smallville, I feel like it does Lex a disservice. But more importantly, and this is the thing that has really, really bothered me, is we're at a point in the story where it's beyond Superman putting his own life on the line. The entire world is at stake. Brainiac's drones are attacking. They are literally rounding people up, harvesting their brains, and turning them into databanks. All of the other heroes of the world, including Green Lantern and Supergirl and Wonder Woman, all the usual suspects, are bottled up, as Brainiac is wont to do. And Superman takes what I feel was a wildly unrealistic and unacceptable gamble. He gambles the lives of everyone on the planet on the notion that Lex is actually capable of good and will do the right thing in the end. And if the stakes had been personal to Superman, like it was just Superman's powers or Superman's life on the line, okay. Now, there's still an argument to be made, well, hey, he's still depriving the world of a Superman. Even in that instance, that's not, but okay, I can allow that. But the notion that he would go through with this when the stakes are that high, I look, a year from now, I might do another episode on this and I'll be like, guys, I read it again. I came around. Yeah, it's great. I love it. But I really had a problem with this.
I agree because part of me almost wishes that Superman took that gamble and then Lex like turns around like, I've got exactly what I wanted. And he's like, I knew that you would do this. I calculated that your emotional attachment and guilt led you to this. And now you're going to die and I'm going to have your powers and I'm going to take over. I almost wish that that's what happened. Like, because he is taking this ultimate chance on a friendship to establish, like, I've believed in you in so long. And if I had really bought into feeling that Lex really did have that good in him, then maybe I would have went with it. But going back to the first issue, if it had been something where we had opened up with an action scene and Lex is on top of Lex's tower and he does something kind of douchey where he activates like a high pitched frequency just to get Superman's attention and Superman lands and he's like, what? And, Lex is broadcasting like he does. And he tells him basically everything. But he starts off by destroying. And all this, it doesn't feel like he has any. Like, does he have the redemption in him? Like, you're not really helping me buy into that this person has that little bit of good in them that you're going to gamble the entire fate of everything on. And I almost wish it had turned out the opposite way, because it would have shown Superman that you're not always right. And that Lex had made his choices when they were younger and he's lived them out. And that's who he is. and that Superman has to accept the fact that this is the person that Lex has become, and it's not because of something he did. It's because this is who Lex chose to be.
I agree, because otherwise the way it plays out, I mean, does it not put stock in this guilt that he's felt all along? Like, well, maybe if I had confided in him, it would have been different. Okay, so a few things here. So I think we're very similarly aligned here, and this sparks a few different things. One of them, unsurprisingly, is Smallville. So
you go figure.
Yeah, right. One of the things that an episode that I've quoted a lot over the years. It's one of my all-time favorite episodes from season 6. It's called Nemesis. It's when Clark and Lex are trapped underground with kryptonite. And this is
the story that we've seen repeated again and again, like in Superboy and everything's like, yes.
Yeah. There's something I think very kind of elemental about the story and why it lends itself to multiple tellings. And at this point in the story, their friendship is broken. Lex is married to Lana. They're not buddies anymore, but they are forced to work together. And there's a point where Clark is trapped under rubble and it looks like Lex is going to leave him to die. And then Lex comes back and he's like, you don't really think I'd leave you down here to die, right? There's this whole conversation. We've talked about it. At the end of the episode, Clark is having a heart-to-heart with Martha. And he does raise this question that's brought up here as well. He's like, how much of who Lex is because of me? But he also says to Martha, he's like, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in years today. My friend. And that's the part of the story that I feel was lacking in the last days of Lex Luthor. Moments where he sees his friend. Now, there are a couple of points where they're on this tour through the DCU and trouble arises. There's an encounter in the Phantom Zone, right? Because our first stop is Kandor. The Kandorians can't do anything for Lex. So Superman's idea is, well, they can't even cryogenically freeze him. So the only solution that Superman can come up with is the Phantom Zone, where he won't have physical form and he'll be able to stay until Superman's able to come up with some idea. But when they get there, they're attacked by Zod and his army, who are able to take physical form within the zone and actually make Superman physical, and they attack him. And Zod tries to recruit Lex, right? But Lex turns on Zod and actually helps Superman. Even in that moment, though, it's not so much, I reject you, Zod. It's more of a, now's not the right time, but under different circumstances, I'd be side by side with you. And then there's another instance when they're in Atlantis, right? And they encounter Lori Lamaris and they're asking the Atlanteans for magical help. And then Superman ends up encountering this monstrous sea creature, and Lex intervenes there and helps. So, like, there are a couple of instances where we see Lex helping in the heat of battle, but I don't know that it rises to the level of, oh, I got a glimpse of my friend.
No, it doesn't, because if you look at it back, it still can be self-serving, because Lex still like, I need his help to heal me because this in the Phantom Zone is not going to work. This here is not going to work. It's still very much, I'll help you because it serves me better in the long run.
So that's, I think, one of the knocks against the gamble that Superman is willing to take. Like, I don't know that we're really shown enough to let us say, like, okay, this faith in Lex is well placed. We all love the big budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join All Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit allyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw, yeah. Okay, here's the other big thing. Not a lot of our usual supporting characters in this story, but issue 2 opens up with a discussion between Lois and Jimmy, where Jimmy is essentially voicing the outcry of the people. And we see polls on the Daily Planet computer screens, like, are you for or against Superman helping Lex? And the vast majority are against. And Jimmy essentially puts forth this notion of like Superman should let Lex die. And then Lois articulates, I think, Mark Waid's reasons why Superman should not kill ever under any circumstances. And Lois goes so far as to say, and I don't have the exact quote, perhaps you do in front of you, but I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, Superman can't just snap Lex's neck. Right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't take much of a leap to glean what that is a direct reference to. And look, Mark Waid has been very vocal about his feelings about that. I think the legend goes he stood up in the theater during Man of Steel when Superman killed Zod. I'm not going to assume that all of the listeners of this episode have listened to all of our episodes. So I'm going to say this real quick, but I'm not going to dwell on it. With respect to Clark killing Zod in Man of Steel, if you feel, audience, that the movie should never have put him in that position, I understand. I have felt that in the past. I get it. If you feel like, hey, the movie should have done more to set up that moment or more afterward to unpack that moment, I get that. I share that as well, and I've talked about that. For me personally, though, in the vacuum of the moment of Superman killing Zod to save that family in the train station, as a lifelong fan of Superman, as a parent, as an attorney by training, if not by practice, as someone who considers myself fairly ethical, I'm okay with his action in that moment. And I get if those listening don't feel the same way, but for me, I'm okay with that. It's just kind of interesting to me, though. I feel like a lot of people who, and I don't want to generalize, but I do feel like there are a lot of people who took such umbrage at that Man of Steel moment might not have batted an eye at Superman taking the gamble that he does in the last days of Lex Luthor. And I scratch my head at that a little bit because I look at the vacuum of that moment in Man of Steel and I understand why Superman made the choice that he did when he was put in that situation. And yet I look at what he does in the last days of Lex Luthor and I say to myself, Superman would not do that. Like, and it's very hard for me to kind of come around on that. And I know people, probably a ton of people who feel the opposite. I'm not there.
I'm gonna say something on that in just a second, but I found this part. You're talking about the Lois speech here, where she says Superman exists to find solutions where ordinary people can't. Take that away from him. He's not Superman. About what he's trying to do with Lex, and if you don't have the guilt part, I feel like he goes way above and beyond to save Lex. Compared to, like you said, why isn't he doing this for other people? And the fact that Lex tricked him into admitting to the world that he would save him. Now, back to what you were saying. And I won't harken on it all day either, but the idea of Man of Steel was young Superman learning his powers. He makes a decision to save this family. The only thing he knows how to do, what to do. They wrote it. I mean, they purposely wrote it like the Phantom Zone is closed. There is no kryptonite. We have not seen any weakness. And Zod even says that you'll have to stop me because I'll never stop. They wrote it into it. So he did what he had to. Yes, I love him falling to the knees. I hate the next scene after that because I feel like it undercuts that moment. But that's another discussion. So, but in this, you have a much older Superman who's taking a gamble on a Lex that we as the audience maybe don't know that he's worthy of this gamble. Like, okay, if you took this same scenario and you put it in the current continuity run, I would buy it.
Yes.
I would
Yeah,
I would
yeah, yeah, yeah,
trust that
yeah.
move because what they've done with Lex about he lost his memories, but then he regained them, but he chose not to be that man anymore. That he was going to be a better man, that he was going to pay for his things, that he would do right, like he's always wanted to be a better person. And then, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody that's not caught up on the current
Yeah,
run of
including
Superman.
me.
Yeah, and I hope I didn't say anything out of
No. Good.
but the idea is if you took this scenario and you put that into that current story, what's going on, I would be like, okay, I can see why Superman is making this choice.
Yeah.
But here, I think it's because this is what Mark Waid wanted. This is how Mark Waid, who loves Superboy, he loves Superman, and what's the quote by Elias S. Magan about every Superman story is a morality tale? I'm paraphrasing right now. That's what he wanted to tell, was a tale of morality and belief in Lex Luthor.
Right. And I think to a large extent, and for the most part, it really worked for me. I think, I think where my issues come into play are in two instances. One is that dialogue between Lois and Jimmy, because I feel like that was the writer wanting to make a very specific point and clearly is calling to mind that movie that he objected to. And my objection isn't like, oh, I love Man of Steel. My objection is more that that's not really the argument that's on point or relevant at that point in the story, right? Like, because it's not about, oh, should Superman kill Lex, right? It's more about, should he try to save him or not, right? And then it segues into this whole thing about snapping necks. And even there, I mean, maybe I'm getting nitpicky here, but Lois's whole thing about, well, if he snaps one neck, they'll have to snap everybody's neck. It's like, well, to be clear, it's not even that I'm advocating that Superman should kill, but I'm just saying, like, the notion that, like, he shouldn't because then he'll have to kill everybody. I don't agree with that.
Isn't as the same, like I said, the same thing they talk about when they talk about Batman and the Joker. If I kill the Joker, then there's one more murderer, and then it becomes easier and easier to just keep killing. Okay, I get that, but
yeah, right. And like I agree. Like I get the notion that once you cross that line, you've sort of broken something. I do get that. But at the same time, especially if we're talking Batman and Superman, two of the strongest willed people, icons, pillars of the DC universe, do they not have the self-control? So I don't love that argument. And then, where this kind of morality tale hits another speed bump for me really is that choice that he makes with the device to give his powers to Lex for all the reasons that we talked about. And, we brought up Batman a couple of times. Did you read Cacophony, the Kevin Smith written 3-issue miniseries?
I did. It's been a while, but I did. I read. I think I have Cacophony. I don't have the Widening Gyre, but I did read them both.
We covered Cacophony on a Patreon episode years ago, and part of me's like, I might need to do this again with DeVoe and just have him cut loose on it.
Sweet, I listen to that. I pay for that.
All right, DeVoe, maybe we'll do it. But that Kevin Smith Cacophony miniseries, I'm hard pressed to really recommend it to people, but there's just one moment that I'm going to single out here. I think it's at the end of issue 2, but the assassin Onomatopoeia, this villain that Kevin Smith had introduced in Green Arrow years earlier, stabs. There's an altercation among Batman, Joker, and Onomatopoeia on a rooftop. And Onomatopoeia stabs Joker and then makes a run for it. So Batman's choice is to let Joker die and go after this killer who has however many bodies, right, to his name, or let him go and save the Joker. And you know where this is going, right? Mm-hmm. He saves the Joker. And to Kevin Smith's credit, Gordon comes up there and Gordon articulates everything that the audience is screaming. He's like, what are you doing? And I think where it gets frustrating is that, like in that Batman example, it's one thing to say Batman's not going to snap Joker's neck. It's another thing to say that he's going to prioritize proactively saving his life at the expense of catching this genuine threat. And to me, the equivalency isn't trying to save Lex from the disease, to be clear. But to me, the comparison lies in in giving up his powers and placing that level of trust. And like, to me, like when I was reading that the climax of Last Days of Lex Luthor, I flashed right back to that rooftop in Cacophony. And it's just like, I get the ideals that these books are trying to capture. You know, we've recently spent a lot of time going through the works of Joe Kelly on the Superman titles, Action Comics specifically.
And I'm in the middle of reading that run on my
Yes.
show as well.
Yeah. I mean, they're so good. And there you have instances, 1,000 Years in Valhalla with Wonder Woman, never even kisses her, doesn't kill Manchester Black despite everything he puts him through. You get to Ending Battle. Superman thinks Lois is murdered and he still doesn't break. He still doesn't kill Manchester. To me, I feel like that sort of ideal tracks. And part of the reason I think is that it's personal. Like what Superman is this is very important to me. Like what Superman is giving up, withholding from himself, whatever you want to call it, is personal to him, right? He's not indulging in this moment with Wonder Woman. He's not giving in to his revenge over Lois. With this book, it's the stake. It's the fate of the world. It's different. And I feel like there has to be a different choice there. So that's where I really draw a line.
I agree with you. It's, to quote the Batman Begins, like, I don't have to kill you, or I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you.
Yeah. And I like what you said, though. You had a great point, though. And this was something that I was kind of thinking about, too. It's like, yeah, I mean, I think Lex, like, this could have taken a different turn where it's like Lex makes the choice to give up his life to restore Superman. Like, that's his big heroic moment and sacrifice. And you allow him that.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's, if Superman's all about, like, I'm not forcing my will upon people and I'm not going to make people do what I think is right or whatever, doing that in that moment is forcing your will upon somebody, so it's just, if this was in continuity or something, I think we'd have more problems with it. But the fact that it's this Black Label book that we can just like take or leave it and just be like, it's just a version of this story. It's just, a what if type scenario, or just be like, I don't really think that's it. I'll let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and look, I do love that final moment where we get that flashback and you see Lex saving Clark and saying, tell no one. And I do like when Clark reveals his identity to Lex in the fortress and unloads all of this guilt that he's been carrying. And Lex's response is like, it's my life. You've made it all about you. Like, I've had a great life. Like, my only failing was not killing you.
Right. And that's the Lex I expect, is like, and that's, I think, when Clark should have realized, oh, I was harboring all this and I need to let this go.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but I do feel like it's important to delineate that, like, Superman seeing the best in Lex and wanting to give him the chance by means of saving his life from the disease, I'm fine with. It's just that it's that next step. Like, that's where it goes too far. There's also another great moment where Lex is directing Superman to build a device, but Lex says, he's like, I do wish you had told me. He's like, I don't think it would have made a difference, but I wish you had. Right? Like, I like that moment. Oh, I wanted to ask you, what was your take on the characterization of Lex in this, the personality that he displays? Because I feel like it is, I don't know how in line it is with, I mean, it's not, I don't want to say that's a radical departure, but I don't know how in line it is with kind of the books we've been reading over the past few decades. Like, I feel like he has more of a personality here. There's more of a snarkiness to him that you don't always get. I was curious what you thought.
I'm trying to pinpoint it, but it's not exactly a post-crisis Lex, but it's not exactly like a Silver Age Lex, but it has the shades of that, because they don't quite cement that. Not that I can remember, like, he's in Lex Corp or Luthor Corp. He's not that businessman. They don't quite cement that he's the mad scientist either. Lex very much takes a back seat on a lot of his intelligence as far as things that he can do in the story, and lets Superman lead, like, the charge to heal him. So he is just kind of this more antagonistic voice to him, where he is more of a like you said, snarky character and just
Yeah.
this, I don't want to say sniveling villain, but there is a little bit more of like this kind of to him.
Yeah, I did not dislike it. It was just, it was interesting to me. I mean, I think instances that kind of come to mind when he's in the Phantom Zone, there's this bit where he's like, I'm Lex freaking Luthor. Like, of course I figured out how to make myself have tangible form here. There's another moment where he and Superman encounter all of the, like the brain data banks that Brainiac has set up. And he's like, oh, ick. Just things that it's like, I wouldn't typically associate. And then when he's the final confrontation with Brainiac, when Lex is fighting Brainiac and he's listing off all the things that Brainiac has done. I mean, namely using Lex as a pawn, subjecting him to this illness. But he goes, and you almost made me and Superman friends again. And I was just like, again, fine. But it was just kind of interesting. Like it didn't quite strike the note that I typically associate with Lex, but it was still an intriguing, kind of dynamic. I have a question for you, and this is very much Monday morning quarterbacking. And as I ask this, I recognize like this was not my story to tell. So I respect the choices, even if I don't always agree with them. But like, I can't shake the notion that like I kind of wish the story had been from Lex's perspective and narrated by Lex, not Superman. I'm curious how you feel. Obviously, it would have been different. Like it just would have been a different thing.
I like that because it makes Superman, it wouldn't change any of what he does. But if we're looking at it as a spiritual sequel to Birthright, and Birthright's very much led by Superman, this is kind of getting Lex's side of how he thought, he felt, and maybe about, and that might help with how it ends because now we're inside Lex's head. And we maybe learn more about how he felt when they were in Smallville, how he felt when they did, when he lost his hair in that moment. And maybe he reconsiders like what that meant. I think it would recontextualize a lot of it and make it just a little bit more interesting. So it doesn't feel like a woe is me, I'm Superman and I can't save Lex. And it really be like, Lex, like, this is the only time in my life I've actually ever been afraid, but I can't let the alien know that I'm scared, that I need his help. Have to play it cool, have to keep my head into things. Something where we see a different side of Lex because we're actually seeing for the first time Luthor's thoughts in mind. I think it might make it just a little bit more of an interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I feel like it would have made this feel like more of a bookend to Birthright. I feel like it also would have alleviated the complaint I raised earlier where it's like with the flashback stuff, where it's like all the stuff we've seen already. But now if you showed it from Lex's perspective and his narration, it's the same events, but now you're getting a different spin on it. So I don't know. I mean, I had more complaints than I thought I was going to coming into this, but this is part of the process and it's very cathartic. I'm really enjoying this. I do want to single out a couple of things that I really did love. One of them is candor. So Superman takes Lex to the fortress, doesn't let him out of his sight though. Right? He's very particular about that.
I would never.
And with candor, Waid kind of incorporated some ideas that alleviated some of the misgivings is probably too strong because I've really become a fan of candor and we spent a lot of time talking about it not too long ago, but I guess one of the things that I still kind of bump up against sometimes is, okay, how do we kind of preserve the tragedy of Krypton being destroyed and him being the last, more or less, of his kind when you have hundreds of thousands or millions of these Kandorians in the Bottle City? And yes, there's always kind of that physical separation. Like to be there, we have to have this miniaturization process and all that. But Waid, I think, hits on two things. One is that they've really deified Superman, right? Like he can't just like be one of the guys in Kandor. Mm-hmm. They view him as this savior, even though he still can't figure out how to enlarge them. So there's that. And then also he talks to Lex about how it's like, yeah, like Kryptonians, like they're benevolent people. They're empathetic, but they prioritize science over humanism, right? And it can be kind of cold. And so there's this bit of a culture clash or differentiation in ideals. And so it's like he doesn't fit in there, basically, is the idea. So I just kind of like that. Like that was another way where I think I can kind of reconcile, okay, we can have this Bottle City with like all of these surviving Kryptonians, but Yeah, I think what's always been important for me is that there are still barriers there that preserves the element of tragedy. And I think Waid put a good spin on it where you get a couple of good things you can kind of latch onto. So I like that.
I was just like, yes, I was thinking like, I was trying to remember what story was it where like the Kandorians are not only miniaturized, but it's almost like they're frozen in time. Like you're like they're not active. They're just like in a stasis. I can't remember if it was in the comics or an animated thing right now. And I kind of always liked that idea because that makes it one step even more, keeping that tragedy where there's my people, but I can't wake them up and I can't enlarge them. They're forever here. So,
Yeah.
I can't remember where story that was from. If anyone can remember, like I said, I want to say it might have been an animated thing, but I can't think of for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know offhand, but and then another moment that I loved is kind of while we're on the subject of the fortress at the end when Lex has the powers and he's taking off to try to fight Brainiac, and then Superman puts on the Legion fight ring and joins him, and Lex is like, "Oh, you're coming with me," and Clark is like, "You're not alone, Lex. You never were." I liked that. That was a nice moment between the two of them.
I like you said, this is Monday morning quarterbacking, but if there had been a point where Lex, because we don't know the history of these two of this story, if he would have like when Clark reveals him, like Superman reveals him to be Clark, if Lex would have been like, "Yeah, I know, I've known,
Right.
I've just like playing your game. It's been fun," and like undercut him right there, and always been that one step because he's like, I don't know, like if we're gonna spend so much of time weaving these two story as these friends on this thing of redemption, and Clark, Superman really putting himself out there to prove to his friend, like, I do believe you have value. I don't know. It could have been more interesting. And also, I mean, we we can put belief into action. I believe in you. I believe in you, Lex. I always knew that you were good, but we can also be wrong. And I think even Superman can be wrong. He's not infallible about making a bad decision. And I think that this is where the Lex Luthor him dynamic go back and forth is, going back to Smallville, that final scene between Clark and Lex in the series finale of them, basically kind of stepping forward with they're going to be enemies. And he's like, I'm paraphrasing, but like, I'm sorry, Lex, I couldn't save you and all that. Like, that's a realization that he has to come to is he can try, he can try, he can try, he can do all this. He can put himself out there. He can make these choices, make these sacrifices. But in the end of the day, he might not give up on Lex, but Lex might still do the wrong thing, the selfish thing, and you might be proven wrong when you needed to be proven right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very intrigued by this track that you've taken, and I never need much convincing to talk Smallville, and yeah, you're right. I mean, like that, Clark's last line to Lex in the series finale is, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Lex." And unlike so many other times in the series where Clark was clearly burdened by his perceived failings, there was a sense of acceptance with that. It's like, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm going to stop you now." When the
Yeah.
time comes, but I am sorry I couldn't save you. And I feel like there's power in that kind of lesson, that kind of takeaway. The bit with the secret is interesting to me because, yeah, there's a big part of me that probably would have preferred that if Lex was like, "Yeah, I always knew." And then that sort of closes the loop for Clark where it's like, no, okay, he's not this way because I didn't tell him his secret. I mean, I think the approach that this story takes is really this idea that Lex has so buried and suppressed everything about Smallville and anything coming out of Smallville. Like he can't even entertain the notion, right, of Clark being Superman. So there is this denial aspect. It's not just that he's, that obtuse that he can't figure it out. A value in each approach, but yeah, kind of what you're describing is something that I think would have would have resonated with me. Now, we've been mentioning this tour through the DCU, right? We mentioned, of course, Kandor, Phantom Zone, 31st Century, Themyscira, Atlantis, where Superman reunites with Lori Lamaris. Oh, on that note, because we there's reference to his romantic past with Lori, and then there's a point where so they're able to retrieve this plant that has healing properties, this magic plant, right? And it ends up being this psychological curative, not a physical one. So it doesn't solve Lex's problem, but he ingests it, and then he sort of becomes one with the minds of the Atlanteans, right? And he see, I guess, flashes of Clark and Laurie's romance, because we see Laurie in the wheelchair with Clark. It just kind of prompts this thought that in this story, in this continuity, I mean, I guess it's really ambiguous, but I don't like. Do you think in the last days of Lex Luthor, this continuity, Lois and Clark are together, or that she knows a secret? Because we're not really shown or told one way or the other. But I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards not. But it's very there's nothing definitive one way or the other.
I'm going to lean towards not, because I feel like, based on things I've seen in Mark Waid's writing and stuff before, if they were, there'd be some sort of like thing in there between when Superman's listening to Lois and she's talking to Jimmy and he like says, "Thanks, Lois." I thought there'd be something that would have like a punctuation about the relationship, or even when she's talking, like I could see something where thought bubble of her like, you know, "Be safe, Clark," or "I support you, Clark," or even having a scene like of the two of them, like her and him talking. I feel like where she confronts him, like, "How could you agree to this?" Or, "I support you. I know what you're doing," because Superman saves everybody. I feel like if they were together, that is a scene that we needed, you know? So I'm going to align myself with she doesn't know.
I agree. You know, and by the way, as I always say, especially when we have critiques of things, right? For anyone listening to this, if you just loved Last Days of Lex Luthor's soup to nuts, like great, I'm very glad. And there are, like I said, there are a lot of aspects of it that I enjoyed, and I suspect my impressions might change over time. Like I've just read this all the way through for the first time, right? But this is kind of where I am, and it's important to share.
You know what I just thought of? I think give this another year. We come back and we just kind of do a brief talk about it, because when I first read Three Jokers, I was upset because they had built it up and they had this idea that had been planted and seeded. I went back, I want to say earlier this year, maybe it was the end of last year, and I reread Three Jokers just as a self-contained, by itself story. And I liked it. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the writing. Of course, the art's amazing. And I walked away like, okay, I enjoyed this much more. Not really, because I had not read it since it first came out. And this may be in the same kind of vein where I didn't have super hard expectations for it. But then as I was reading it, I mean, and it ends, I'm like uncomfortable, you know, it's like we read the first issue and we were left like, okay, what's going to happen? All right, we're excited. Like, this is great. 2 years later, we get the conclusion. And then rereading the first issue and reading it straight through, I'm like, did the last issue kind of retroactively make me not like the first issue as much? And I don't know. But I do have a feeling that if I just give it some time, go back again, read it in all one reading, I might just appreciate it more and more for what it is. I don't hate it. I like it. I don't love it the way I wanted to, but I think I'll come around more of appreciating it for the story that Waid is trying to tell about the friendship of two people and believing in each other and not giving up.
Well said. Well said. I agree about time and distance often helping, and I'm sure it will here. I agree about respecting the story that he's trying to tell. And look, I mean, I think this core idea that Superman Clark places this faith in Lex and is willing to take the ultimate gamble on that faith, and his faith is ultimately rewarded. maybe there's something to be said for that. Maybe there's power in that story, that idealism that's rewarded. I think just kind of an alteration of the stakes would have made me vastly more open to it. It's just kind of a tough pill to swallow. I don't mean to belabor this point, but on the note of if this story had been told from Lex's perspective, I think that also solves another problem. Because I agree with you. It's like, man, why wasn't there a scene between either Clark and Lois or Superman and Lois? But if you tell the story from Lex's perspective, then it's more understandable why you're not seeing that. All that to say, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you articulated exactly what I have been feeling and what I think is coming through in this recording, which is I didn't love it the way I wanted to. Like when Waid told me 4 years ago there's going to be a sequel to Birthright, it's like, the mind is off to the races and I'm imagining all the things that it's going to be, and it ended up being something different. It's not that it's not valuable, but it's not quite what I had envisioned. And that's not a fault or a failing of the story. But I think that's kind of what I'm wrestling with a little bit, where if you had given me a list of options, like what a sequel to Birthright could be, I don't know if this would have been my top choice. And so that's kind of what I'm kicking around.
Just to put it a little bit more into the context of what's going on in comics right now I'm not going to spoil anything, so don't worry. But on the app, there are 2 issues of Hush 2. And I've read both of them. And I'm not feeling it. The announcement of a Hush 2 sets up expectations and thoughts. And sometimes the problem is that nothing can live up to the expectations and the stories that we create in our own mind. And with Hush, I've decided I'm not going to read anymore until it's done and then read it all together, because maybe I'll appreciate it more. It's a side note. But I think expectations really can kill a story. I have a great friend. I love him to death. But he'll take a nugget of information or something from a movie or something, and he'll kind of get excited and blow it out of proportion. And he'll build up this whole story, this whole idea of what this is going to be or what it could be. And then we'll watch the movie and he'll be upset because it wasn't what he created it in his own head, making it to be. And hearing sequel to Birthright, what's it going to be? Okay, this could be this, they're going to do this. Oh, what if he's going to, this is the part where, like I said, it's that middle part that we didn't get, that the Empire Strikes Back of this story that we didn't get. We went from A New Hope to Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, no, I think Hush is a good comparison. I haven't read the sequel yet, but and both Birthright and Hush came out around the same time, right? So 20 plus years before the sequel, and by the original creators, and yeah, and you kind of build it up as far as what it's going to be. So I think it definitely has that working against it. Now we had a few more patron comments and questions, so let me share those. So our pal Rick Reason said, I truly enjoyed it. I'm still not super keen on them being friends in Smallville. Sacrificing himself to save Luthor seemed pretty on character, but it was a big gamble giving him his powers. In the end, it worked out, but I'm not sure Luthor's sacrifice seemed plausible. I was 10 out of 10 until the last few moments, so my final rating turned out to be 8 out of 10. The art was astounding, probably Hitch's best Superman yet, and his rendition of Brainiac was excellent. Duncan says, I quite enjoyed this, but I don't think it was in any way groundbreaking. I don't love the way Waid writes Superman, and honestly, this felt more like a Silver Age story than a Birthright follow-up. Birthright isn't particularly beloved to me. I didn't think it was necessary when it was released, and I read it again recently and didn't get a huge amount out of it. But then I was never a fan of Smallville. Power to you. Love what you love. Thank you, Duncan. It just didn't feel like a Superman show to me, and Birthright always felt like an attempt to Smallvilleify the origin to me.
Smallvilleify. I like that.
Yeah. We also had a comment / question from our pal Martin Gray, who questioned why none of the main covers featured Lex. They were all Superman centric, which is an interesting question. I mean, I welcome your thoughts on this. I know at least some of the variants had Lex, right?
All right. I'm looking at the 3 main ones right here. I have them right here in front of me. The first one is almost this angelic, religious type symbol of Superman in the sun. The second one is and I hate using this term because I like this in a lot of contexts, but this generic Superman flying over a crowd, looking up and praising him. And the third is Clark Kent with the glasses.
Yeah.
I think the third one is appropriate. I think the first one is kind of appropriate because it's, if you're looking at it almost from Lex's point of view of this being is going to be my savior or not. And then the third one is how he's now just Clark. He doesn't have his powers, and it's kind of him as Clark. I think the second cover could have been better. I think that's the one that maybe you would have had Lex on. But I do think it's interesting that the covers don't reference Lex at all. And they're like, you could take the title off this and put almost any other Superman title across it, and it would just be the same.
Yeah. And again, I didn't pull up all the variants, but I mean, the one that I own of issue 1, I believe it features Lex, unless I'm misremembering, but still on the main covers, right? I think this point stands. And Martin says, I did ask Bryan Hitch on Blue Sky about this, and he said that in his mind, it's a Superman comic, so he dominates. Martin continues, okay, there's dominates and there's kicks title star off the cover altogether. So many great scenes that could have sold the issue, and we see none of them. The cover images were terrific, but this is a comic, not a portfolio. Yeah, it was kind of a curious choice, especially given the title of it.
I pulled up, I just kind of Googled the variant covers, and yeah, some of the variant covers have Lex, and one of them is the like Michelangelo David finger reaching to God of Lex reaching out to Superman. And I don't know, I if I was telling a story like this, and just with my personal taste and stuff, I would have each one of the covers be almost this similar to where they are now with 1 and 3, like this one image that kind of sums up what this first book is about. And the 3 images would tell a story, and they'd be very not bland, but just very specific. I mean, back to how they did the covers for 3 Jokers, how it was like Joker, Red Hood, Batman, you know?
Yeah. Another art question from Jan, who asks, what are your thoughts on Bryan Hitch as an artist? Have you read his Marvel work? I mean, I've historically been a fan of Bryan Hitch. I mean, I almost certainly it was Ultimates that first introduced me to him. I mean, I remember he talked about a book plagued by delays. I remember that. And, a random little anecdote, but I remember, I forget whether it was Ultimates or Ultimates 2, the sequel, but it was during the period of time I was working at my local comic shop during high school. It must have been a summer, and I was there on a Wednesday breaking down the shipment. And I remember a new issue of the Ultimates was finally coming out after being delayed for months. And I could probably find the cover, but it was one that had all of these soldiers parachuting in the sky in the background. But I remember when I opened up the box and I pulled the issue out, it looked like dirt or smudges. And then one of my other buddies was like, no, like those are the soldiers parachuting. I'm like, this is what we waited months for. But other than that, generally, no. I've been a fan of his stuff. I mean, I enjoy, he and Waid had a run on JLA, the JLA title after Morrison left. And I was a fan of that, and I liked his stuff here. I mean, it's going back to where we started about whether this feels like a sequel to Birthright. I mean, if it had been Leinil Yu, right, our artist on Birthright doing the art here, that would have given it a whole different feel. So this was a definitely a distinct artistic presentation. But yeah, I mean, I am a Bryan Hitch fan. How about yourself?
I like Bryan Hitch's art, and I'm going to say this, and this isn't a negative. It's just something. His art has a very rubbery feel.
Is it how long the torsos are?
I mean, the way they bend and move, like the torsos, but like if you look at like the legs, sometimes they have this very they feel very fluid, like their bodies could be turned or twisted, and like they're not solid, like rigid or bone. They feel like they could almost like they're bendable. Like you're playing with the rubber bendable toys instead of regular action figures. And that's not a negative. I'm just saying that's what a lot of his art, because I'm looking at just Bryan Hitch art right now. It just reminds me of. So
yeah, no, I hear you. Jan also had a couple of other questions that I'm going to hold off for now because they might actually be full episodes at some point. We'll see. But I will kind of use Jan's questions as an inspiration for a new question for you. And I'm really putting you on the spot here, but it's like, having now finished The Last Days of Lex Luthor and you read it, sat with it, we had this conversation. I mean, like I said, this might be too tough to answer right now, but where does this what kind of space does this story occupy when you think of the all-time great Lex Luthor stories? Like, is this one of those ones that you're like, yeah, like this is going to be up there on my list? You're still not quite sure where it lands. Like, how do you feel?
I'm not 100% sure where it lands, but I don't think it'll be that high because I feel like Lex is very passive in this story. I think his biggest move is tricking Superman into helping him. But at the same time, like, this is a Lex Luthor that I'm just meeting this Lex Luthor. I don't know him and Superman's history other than what they really bring into this book. I don't, like we talked about, is he Luthor Corp? Is he Lex Corp? Is he a mad scientist? Has he been president before? Has he just been in jail? What are the crimes that he has done? And I feel like he's so absent for most of the story, just kind of passively in the background, that I can't really put it on as a great Lex Luthor story. Now, if he had actually orchestrated some of the things or been more active, or if he had been if Superman was like going to be, I'm going to give you my powers, Lex, and save you so that you can do this. And then he had flipped it on Superman and was like, no, I was wrong. The world needs you. And Lex sacrificed himself on the end, tricking Superman. It could have been one of those, like, this is where Lex goes out. But to me, right now, where it's sitting is, it's just like that's a good story with Mark Waid. Like, if it had been part of like his, just in his World's Finest run with Lex, or just in his run, it just would have blended in and been like, okay, it's a good story with Lex. But it's a separate story that I just don't think has the power to just stand by on its own and really stand out. There's not enough meat on the bone for me.
I understand. I had a text exchange with Lord Retail from Acme Comics. I don't think he would mind me sharing this. This was after number 2, where he texted me. He was like, it was
I just
great.
love the fact that I know that guy. Like, I still think it's crazy because when I lived in North Carolina, that's the shop that I went to because it was by my work. So when you had him on and I heard, like, it still blows my mind.
Yeah.
That, like, we have that weird connection of knowing this guy.
No, I know, that's great. But after issue 2, he texted me and he said, I think this will, he said, I say this will be up there with All-Star and Kingdom Come as here's why we like Superman story. I mean, I'll have to check in with
now,
him.
That's a different perspective, though.
Yeah, that is a different perspective. Fair. Even on that note, though, I mean, I'll have to check in with him now that he's finished it. And I think this is one of those things like where, like, time will tell, if this is one of those things that is a perennial and people always go to it. And what I will say, though, is regardless of what misgivings I have, I worked at a comic shop for many years, like I said, and this is definitely one of those things where if I were still working at a comic shop and someone came in, I would feel confident recommending it to someone. And it is one of those things, despite all of our back and forth over, like, oh, was it a sequel? Was it not? If someone picked up Birthright and they were like, hey, I want a second book to go with it, I would feel confident giving them this. And certainly if they read Birthright and particularly if the Lex piece really resonated with them, I would have no qualms about suggesting this as well. But yeah, I guess time will tell sort of what space it continues to occupy on shelves and in terms of those recommendations and everything. And then we had one last comment here from Logan. Logan was very hot on it. He said, I absolutely loved it. I admit I love the first issue more than I love the ending. Yeah, but see that we're still on that thread here. He said, I love the first issue more than I love the ending, but the ending was good enough that I still had a good time. What I loved most about it, though, was the flashbacks to Clark and Lex's childhoods. As a guy who is from the deep South and knowing Waid himself is from rural Alabama, I think there's a fascinating arc between how Waid portrayed rural people in Birthright and Impulse versus how they and Lex are portrayed in this story. I think this comic probably has a lot in it of Waid making peace with his childhood. At the very least, the way he broke down why Lex chafed in Smallville so badly really helped me make peace with mine. And I wish I could tell him how much I appreciate that. My favorite comic of 2025 thus far. That's a very interesting, distinct perspective. Certainly, I hadn't thought of that, so I appreciate that comment.
It might like Lord Retail said, as why we like Superman is a much different way of looking at the book than is it a great Lex Luthor story. Now, why do we like Superman in this? I could definitely see it being something like, hey, here's something that shows his dedication to a friend. Here's something that shows that he never gives up. And here's something that he will go to the end of the earth to save somebody. But then once again, like you said earlier, like, then why doesn't he do that for everybody? Well, so
My last two questions for you here, and then we'll sign off. So one is going back to what I said at the top. I mean, I feel like now we have to also include this in. I mean, it lives up to its title. It is the end of this iteration of Lex Luthor. We see him fried into skeletal remains, but we also have to include this, I think, now in the final Superman stories as well. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there it is. It's almost like Mark Waid's For the Man Who Has Everything, where
Or whatever
you
happened
know,
to the Man of
yeah,
Tomorrow. Yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, brain fart. Um, I was just listening to the podcast that Mark Waid was on, so that's why it's on my brain like that. But yeah, where that story ends where it's the last Superman story, and he kind of winks to the camera, kind of thing. He doesn't have his powers anymore. This is very similar, where it's the last Superman story. He's not Superman anymore. He's just Clark. He's going to go about as just Clark now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it now is in that category. And then my last question, we get, like I said, this double page spread in issue 2 of all of the other DC Universe locales that Superman tries to find a cure. I mean, it's funny. Part of me says, like, man, this could have been 6 issues. We could have gone to all these places. I think it would have gotten too repetitive at a certain point. So I think at a certain point, you have to kind of use that shorthand to show the length to which they're going without bogging down the story. So I think that was an effective device. But of all of those other locales we saw, like Oa, Ran, Thanagar, New Genesis, was there any one in particular where you were like, oh man, I wish we could have had a scene there?
Maybe, and this might just completely like destroy the book, but if they're going to travel to the future, and they're having this, why not travel to the past and like go back to that day? And like, it's almost like they're sitting back together watching the events of their younger selves and the choices that led to, the Lex losing his hair, and be like, and almost have this kind of look on things like, this is where, back to, you did this here, you did this here. This is what happened afterwards. Look what I did. And it's like, if we could only warn your younger self, or something where you never get exposed to kryptonite. But then of course, like at the same time, it's a Brainiac thing. So
Yeah.
I've always liked Lex with kryptonite poisoning being because of his own actions, his own obsession with Superman, experimenting with this substance they really don't know as much about, and that's what's going to kill him is the kryptonite. So
Yeah. I mean, any of them I think would have been intriguing to see. But I don't know, maybe the Spectre. I think like that conversation would have, not so much a locale, but a person and a conversation that could have been interesting. I had one more thing because I was saying to myself, like, how did I think this was going to end? Like, what were my expectations? I mean, I read it all in one sitting, so it's not like I had that much time where I was like, gee, I wonder where this is going. I guess in the end, I did not think this was all a trick by Lex. I really didn't think Lex was going to betray Superman. I didn't feel like that's where it was going. For whatever, actually what my gut instinct was, obviously I was way off, but I thought we might land in Lexor territory, like going back to those pre-crisis stories where he becomes the hero of this alien world. I just kind of thought, and especially knowing Wade's love of DC history, I kind of thought it might be one of those things like, yeah, maybe on another planet he's able to survive or something like that. And then he, we kind of have an homage to the, Lex being the benevolent ruler of Lexor, or something like that. I was wrong, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
Would have been interesting, but I'm with you though. Like, I feel like I had thoughts and expectations, when I read the first one, like, oh, where is this going to go? But because like the conversation was dead, there was nothing else about it, and we just kind of put this book on the back burner until these other two came out. I reread them all, and I didn't have time to really what's going to happen next. What do I think is going to happen? What do I want to happen? I just kept turning the page and taking the story in as is.
Yeah. Well, look, overall, a lot that I liked, definitely had some issues, definitely had some things that I just would have approached differently, but that is what it is. But I'm grateful that we got this story. I mean, look, I am on record. I love Birthright, always wanted it to be acknowledged as canon, always wanted more stories. And so to finally get something, even if it didn't quite live up to the image of it in my head, I am grateful for it. And I appreciate everything that Waid was going for. And I appreciate you joining me for this, man. This was a lot of fun. I was looking at the schedule. I'm like, I haven't had Tyler on in a while. I gotta get Tyler on. So I do encourage everyone to check out Krypton Report, available on all major podcast platforms and YouTube and social media channels. Anything in particular you want to mention to folks?
Just that, pay attention to our YouTube, as I'm co-directing a production of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, the musical, for my local community theater. It's a big undertaking. It's something that's been really, I've wanted to do for a while. And that's like, I'm going to have some posts and some things on that. It could be really fun. It's something unique to be doing. So.
Right on, man. Yeah, I encourage everyone to check that out. I'm so happy and excited for you, and I look forward to checking that out myself. So I thank you, Tyler. I thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you keep tuning in. And also, the last thing I'll say is, we shared kind of what we were wrestling with when it comes to the last days of Lex Luthor, but I welcome your comments and questions as well. So, you can reach out to us via email or social media links. Everything's in the show notes. But yeah, I'd be curious what you guys think about this. And yeah, don't be surprised if we do a Last Days of Lex Luthor Revisited episode in a year. Probably a decent chance.
It'd be an interesting, just kind of pick back up like 1 year later. How do we feel about this? And so,
yeah, we'll see. But again, thank you all. Make sure you keep tuning in. And of course, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, advanced listens, and more by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today.